Welcome from my side to the data security panel, the first one of this morning. I don't want to start without thanking the organizational committee here. We are sponsoring and cooperating with the German Harvard Conference for many years, meanwhile, and it's always a great fun and inspiring to be here and to cooperate with you. Mr. Leterme already has laid out the topic in a pretty excellent way. He has also been introduced already. So just let me introduce to you the other two panelists. To my left is Professor Susan Crawford. She's currently a visiting professor at the Harvard Law School. She's a professor at Benjamin Cardoso School of Law and at Yeshiva University, and a co-director of the Berkman Center of Internet and Society at Harvard University. She served as special assistant to the president for Science, Technology and Innovation Policy and co-led the FCC transition team between the Bush and the Obama administration. She's a member of the Mayor Michael Bloomberg's Advisory Council on Technology and Innovation. And she is an author of many books, but let me mention one, The Captive Audience, The Telecom Industry and Monopoly Power in the Gilded Ages. And she is a contributor to Bloomberg View and Wired. And she seems to be also an activist because she's a founder of the One Web Day, Global Earth Day for the Internet that takes place each September 22nd. Welcome to the panel. Our third panelist is a journalist. It's Georg Mascolo. He is a German journalist with some Italian background, as the name discloses. He started reporting for radio and print in 1988, producing features and documentaries for the Spiegel TV, particularly covering the fall of the wall, the Berlin Wall, and the subsequent reunification of Germany. Jörg became political correspondent for the Spiegel magazine in Washington in 2004, and one of the two bureau chiefs in Berlin in 2007. From 2008 to 2013, he served as editor-in-chief of the Spiegel magazine. And let me just take this. He is now, and he was for a while based in DC with the Wilson Center. He is part of the core group of the Munich Security Conference, and he is now here at home, so to say, as a visiting scholar at the Weatherhead Center for International Affairs at Harvard University. So welcome to all of you, and thanks for joining us. My first question goes to Mrs. Crawford. Mr. Leterme has perfectly laid out all the benefits of the internet. We can share this, I think. And I think that there are lots of economic benefits, there are lots of social benefits if you think about all the social networks, and I think we also agree in what he mentioned, the notion of let the internet alone, this kind of libertarian notion. And we all, when the internet was invented, we all felt that it's a free room for endless, limitless communication. But in times of commercialization, and the latest after the NSA, does this still describe the reality of the internet, or is this what we would the internet to be like, but it isn't? What is the US debate on this?
Well, thank you very much for the question. I'm delighted to be here. I was in Berlin in December, participating in many similar conversations about the effect of the Snowden affair on our relationship and on the future of the internet. The internet is the most exciting development of my adult life, and I spend a lot of my time explaining to people how important its openness is. It is true that data flows easily across borders in a non-discriminatory fashion in ways that help economies grow around the world. I am concerned that using the worry about the Snowden affair as an opportunity for, in particular, the telecommunications companies around the world to erect barriers at national borders will serve their shareholders well, but in the end will not be good for the people inside countries doing their best to reach new markets, find new ways of making a living and new jobs. In particular, erecting barriers to the flow of packets would create the risk of retaliation around the world as each country then raised its gates to electronic communications. So the fact of the matter is the internet right now continues to serve its function as it's just a language. Just as kids should learn German in school in the United States, people should understand that the internet is nothing more than an agreement to address packets in a particular way, pieces of data, and to use a globally unique set of addresses. That's it. That's all it does. And that reality continues to function in a very fruitful way for the world. I am hoping that we will take the long view of the contribution of the internet to the world and not artificially play into the hands of a very few players, actually, who would like to see barriers erected. I was on the board of ICANN, the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, for several years, and gained a lot of experience working with less developed countries on internet policy. And it's apparent to me that we continue to have an education task ahead of us to explain that the internet is not something inflicted on countries, but actually lifts all boats around the world for speech, for commerce, and for human thriving.
Yeah, thank you very much. Georg Mascolo, the events around the NSA affair, I think what we share as Germans or as Europeans is the fascination of a free internet. I think our generation is very thrilled by all the possibilities, and I can't imagine a world without Facebook, Google, and all the alike. Nevertheless, what happened last year, it was an outrage in Germany. I must confess that I was a little bit surprised. Maybe I lived too long here in the US. But the extent of this outrage was fascinating. And I would like you to describe a little bit why is that so, and to describe this kind of debate that is evolving in Germany, or has been involved in the past in Germany.
Yeah, thank you. This is what I was expecting, that I would be invited to explain the hysterical German here and why there's all this overreaction in Germany. I don't share this theory at all. Let's start by looking what we learned from Edward Snowden starting in June last year. The original concept of protecting privacy and protecting data was bound to a nation state. So each nation state was protecting the privacy of its own citizens. This doesn't exist any longer, and this is particularly true for Europeans, or let's say for Germans, who are sending almost 90% of their internet traffic through service in the United States. So I think it's simply cold-blooded interest to see for which purposes this data will be used. Second observation, we all know, and everybody in Germany knows, that the Germans are as dependent on American help when it comes to intelligence issues as they are dependent on military capabilities. And this is partly something Germans and Europeans are grateful for, because they know that without American help, they couldn't keep their own countries safe. But what we have also learned is that this is only one part of what the NSA is doing. They behave on every given day like a good friend, and then at the same point as an adversary, as they do, for example, if they are wiretaping or listening to the communication of the German government. Why is the outrage so huge, even among those who are true friends of the United States in the German government, for example? I think there's a pretty simple explanation for that. When all this started last summer, it was the Merkel government who defended the NSA and the American government almost from the first moment on, saying, we don't believe that there's any wrongdoing. We got assurances that there will be a no-spy agreement, and we got written assurances by the NSA, and by the DNI, saying that on German soil, the NSA will never breaking German law. If you talk to those in the government who are close to that, the very simple reason for the disappointment is that they discovered that all this was not true. It wasn't true. So the first assurances the German government got were all wrong. I could also say that many who believe that they are, or who are true friends of the United States, say today they simply lied to us. So this is why we are in this very difficult situation today. There has to be a way forward. I think there is a way forward. If we have all listened carefully to the speech the president gave in January, and he came up with a very exciting proposal, having one of his closest advisors, John Podesta, leading a group on big data and privacy, which is a very smart move. And I would love to see that the Germans and the Europeans come up with the same idea of establishing exactly such a group and start debating all the questions we are debating now for months and months. And I would predict this will go on for quite a while, because only the minor part of the material stolen by Edward Snowden is already public. So having a large debate, a healthy debate between the Europeans and the Americans to find common ground in all this is what I would expect and what I'm hoping for. And I'll leave it with that for a moment.
Thank you, Mr. Leterme. In your excellent speech, you laid out the options on how to deal with this pretty complex environment, and I think we all join the notion of a free internet that needs to be protected and needs to be of the free use of all people in this globe. On the other side, on this events last year, the NSA affairs, etc., there seemed to be some necessity of regulation. Now you said there are three ways to regulate. One is control, which is getting into a dilemma if you want to have a free internet. The other is some legal framework. I mean, and the third one is what you call risk management. As a German, I know that my fellow Germans love regulation, and I think the Europeans love that too. How would you argue to sell all these, the European Parliament, etc., a risk management that keeps the internet open and at the same time provides enough security for data privacy of the citizens?
Thank you very much. I will maybe frustrate you. We are not in a position that we have a global solution. I would just want to put forward three remarks which I think are very important to take into account when we work on strengthening our capacity to guarantee privacy, security, property, and so on. Besides that, let's have a rational approach. And a rational approach, this means in this case, at least be well aware of three things. First, Balkanization of the internet is not an option. I join the colleague here. This is too important, not only for our economies, but also for our societies, for the way we live, the added value of these possibilities, and the openness and the global character of this new tool of communication, of organizing your life, your economies, your societies. This is really too important to have this kind of Balkanization of regulation. Nations, 19th century creations, thinking that they can regulate differently compared to their neighboring countries. So no Balkanization, only international discussions and global discussions. Secondly, I think one should not underestimate the fact that what we are faced with is, on the one hand, not different of what has been happening in the past in terms of telecommunications. On the other hand, the big difference is the volume and the scale. What makes the NSA case so striking is the volume and the scale of what happened. I've been a prime minister of a NATO member state and an EU member state. I can assure you that what has been put forward by Mr. Snowden has maybe in a less on a not so much important scale and not in such a volume has been done through interception of telecommunication. But then phone calls, documents that circulate, this is a phenomenon of all times. And the difference is, as I said in my introductory remarks, is the volume and the scale which is made possible by the technological tool which is used now. Third remark, a little bit provocative to make it understandable very well, it's we have to make a clear distinction between all behavior which is in accordance to, which is normal behavior between citizens, between, let's say, private companies and so on the one side, and surveillance activities by states, by nations, by military people, by spies on the other side. This is really a clear distinction. When you look at the legislation, the regulatory framework which is in place now in most of the developed economies gives enough possibilities to address issues like illicit interception of communication and so on. But at a certain moment, when a nation that has a technological capacity to breach, to really act not in accordance anymore with any legislation, well, then you really have a problem. I mean, it's a question of loyalty, it's a question of respect between partners, between governments, between leaders, which is a totally different problem than the problems you face when you're, as a citizen, sending something to a company or when you're in the data of your data or property of a private company. So first of all, balkanization is not an option. Secondly, it's the volume and the scale which makes it different. But on the other hand, it's quite similar to what happened with phone calls and so on before. And thirdly, let's have a regional approach also in this way, that we make a clear distinction between the normal behavior, normal functioning of an economy, of the behavior of private people on the one hand, and then all the activities of military people, spies, and so on and so on.
So to pick up on both of these last remarks, I think and to answer the question asked at the end of the last panel, what should Germany do? To its credit, the Obama administration called for a very thorough review of the legal basis, the practices of the three-letter agencies, the collection of information, the oversight that should be applied to it. That review group published a terrific report in December 12th, called Liberty and Security in a Changing World. Now, the many recommendations made by that group have not yet been implemented in the United States. There is a rich opportunity for a similar group to emerge in Germany that examines German practices just as the United States examines its own, and connects its work to the tech community here in the United States, which is quite alarmed at the Snowden revelations, and the civil society presence in the United States, which has had a very strong voice here. There's a great opportunity to work across the Atlantic at this level. So the John Podesta Group is an example of what's happening in the United States, but we already have quite a thorough examination of the problems. Because I agree that scale seems to make a difference, and that legal frameworks of oversight are called for, but we will need to cooperate on what they are. And at least we have the beginnings, the inklings, the green shoots of that kind of work being carried out here in the United States.
My impression is that in the beginning of the NSA affair, we had a real split in the transatlantic debate. We had on the one side the American spying. The debate was dominated by particularly the Washington security community on one side, and on the other side of the Atlantic, there were the privacy protectors, pure. What I always try to do is to convince my fellow Germans and to inform them about the really interesting debate that is unfolding here. And my question to you, Georg Mascolo, is there a similar debate in Germany, in a way, a kind of beyond outrage discussion that also weighs in that there are security problems. Sometimes maybe I'm too far away, meanwhile, that the Germans tend to be a little bit privacy-oriented and ignoring some security issues in the whole debate. Is that a wrong perception, or is there a way of getting... Because we have a common dilemma. We not only have a common interest in a free internet, we also have a common dilemma in weighing these two extremes. Is there a chance of getting this debate done transatlantic-wise?
Well, fortunately, I can say that the Europeans are not that naive than it looks like, maybe from here. Right at the beginning, when the Germans started to negotiate a no-spy agreement with the Americans, they started to negotiate a no-spy agreement inside the European Union, because all secret services are operating under the same legal framework. There is certain protection for your own people. There is no protection for every foreigner. But we are all foreigners in this world. You're here in the United States less than a European, because if you're sending an email from Cambridge to Boston, you can believe that it's going only over American soil and through American service. If I'm sending an email from one street in Berlin to another street, there's a high possibility that it's going through an American server. So as a German company, as a German citizen, I simply want to know, what are my assurances? What are my guarantees? Who is guaranteeing my civil rights? Pretty simple. So the Europeans started to debate if there could be a legal framework inside Europe, for example, that secret services will cooperate for good purposes like fighting proliferation of weapons of mass destruction or fighting terrorism. And I think this is all necessary in this world, and this is an area in which I would expect that the cooperation between the NSA and American intelligence services and Europe is particularly very tight. But I would also expect that we get certain assurances that the data from foreigners is not used for every other purpose, which could include economic espionage, political espionage, whatever it is. And this is at the core. And you have rightly said that nobody wants to see the balkanization of the internet, but the debate is already on. Ask the cloud computing industry here in the United States. Now, they are losing a lot of money already. And a lot of European companies are simply asking themselves, what will happen to my data if it's stored in American cloud? We have just learned that the NSA is doing a lot of things even Silicon Valley is not aware of what they're doing there. So Deutsche Telekom, which is state-owned, came up with a proposal of routing certain emails and other communication only through Germany or Central Europe, which would exclude the UK and the United States. And the German government was applauding to that idea. So it gives you a sense how deep the mistrust already is, and that's why I'm particularly looking forward to hear all the ideas I've already heard from President Obama. I mean, he made the unprecedented step of promising that certain guarantees every American citizen has will be extended to foreigners, for example. We haven't seen the details of this, but this would be a huge step, and I'm very much looking forward and we find a solution to this problem. Not only the Europeans and the US have, it's a problem for the whole world.
I would just want to add that this question of sharing common values in terms of protecting privacy and a good balance between protecting privacy on the one hand and protecting security on the other hand. The NSA affair or the NSA dossier is only one example in a row. I think Mr. Butikofer will correct me, but during the last, I remember when I was in the EU presidency, we had a very tough negotiation with the Americans on the data of passengers of airplanes. We had in Belgium we have the SWIFT infrastructure for banking accounts, and I remember we had very tough negotiations with the Americans in terms of how this record could be. The security people, American security people, could go into this data to search for sources to prove terroristic activity. So I think this conference is about, amongst other values we share between the United States, Germany, and maybe broaden to the whole of Europe. And I think we should be fair. We should be aware of the fact that maybe because of 9/11, there is a kind of need for rebalancing and have a common approach based on our common values. We share a new balance to strike between protecting privacy and property, the way we see that, and on the other hand, the right for protection, collective and individual security.
Maybe you are the wrong address for that, but we have already a data security directive of the European Parliament, and we have a safe harbor agreement with the Americans who make sure that there's trust in business making on the both sides of the Atlantic. What's the future of this? And where are the venues new agreements are negotiated and debated about it? Aside of this kind of conferences, are there mechanisms in place where we can say, okay, let's talk again about things like the Privacy Directive and the safe harbor arrangements?
Well, actually, I think there are tremendous opportunities here. In both governments, we share the following thing: a deficit of people at the highest levels of ministries who understand technology, who can speak to each other face to face about what's actually happening instead of taking headlines as reality. It would be very helpful for Secretary Kerry on another trip to Europe to bring with him an information technology delegation that could speak clearly to people in Germany about the way the system actually functions. Both countries run the risk of making policy based on inadequate knowledge, wisdom. Part of that is, I'm a lawyer. We have too many lawyers and economists running policy in an area that has become deeply technical and where people who understand technology need to be at the policy-making table. We share this problem, and getting even a shared understanding of how a future safe harbor might work with technologists at the table would very much help the dialogue in this area.
Just to answer your question, I think at this very moment we are still preparing a future debate and preparing maybe future negotiations. We have some formal institutions like ICANN and others that are working on the stuff. You have other people like, for instance, the group with Karel Bildt that are also thinking about new ways to address the challenges. So I can imagine that during the next year or 2015 there will be a launch of a new platform for negotiations or debates about how we can address, let's say, the things that are apparently not fixed at this very moment. But it's not very clear to see what forum, what institution, what the platform will be on, in which framework the discussion will take place. Don't underestimate also the fact that even some very well-developed economies, some very strong economies, there's a very important difference in the level of regulation, the level of enforcement of regulation between, for instance, the United States, Europe, and some emerging economies. And they have sometimes also different views. So it takes some time to be ready for negotiations and debate to try to find new solutions.
to balance security and privacy, it's a public debate. So I would like to open the discussion to questions from the audience here, because this is, as you said, it's not a discussion only amongst professionals, but we should have a more societal kind of debate. Is there a microphone over there? I think we collect these three speakers and then...
Yes, thank you very much. Martin Klings of the German Weekly Beat site. I have two questions. First of all, when you look at what President Obama has suggested, it seems to be the first time that someone proposes an international framework or is willing to go the first step in granting some rights to foreigners, because so far, spying on nationals and foreigners on your territory is regulated, but spying on foreigners abroad is not regulated. So this seems to be the first step. I don't know in which direction it could go at the end and what it means to extend your privacy right also to foreigners, if that means involving the FISA court or what it means at the end of the day. The second question is, I still think that there needs to be some debate about the concept of privacy, because I think when I talk to Americans and when I talk to Germans, there is still a difference in the concept, especially when it comes to the bulk collection of metadata, because we have Supreme Court rulings on that so far, and you don't. And in Germany, when the right of privacy was established, it also means being the owner of your personal data. This has not been decided by the Supreme Court yet. Your privacy right is more linked to the Fourth Amendment, search and seizure, and it's more linked to my home is my castle, but not actually to be the owner of your intellectual and your private data. So there is a difference in concept which needs to be addressed. And I think this is also part of the misunderstanding that sometimes, is creating the big transatlantic gap. Thank you.
I should have known Martin Klings also is a lawyer, but I think both questions are going to you.
Well, I think all of us are struggling with what privacy means in a world in which data is combined on the fly. This issue of scale is tremendous, especially with high-capacity networks. We can't even imagine how data is combined and used in the future. So a concept of owning a fact about yourself seems increasingly archaic. But the concept of protecting against unauthorized uses, especially aggregated uses of deeply personal data, still has valence in this world. We're all struggling with this. I think that we in the United States are seeing the rise of a very rich civil society conversation on exactly these points, and test cases being brought that will question our reliance on, you're a lawyer, the idea that once you hand your data over to a third party, that's it, you've lost all expectation of privacy. That cannot be right in today's world. But what the future meaning is going to be is unclear. This is why I'm so interested in seeing links between nascent civil society groups in Germany and the very active discussion in the United States, because there's a lot of common ground where we could make progress.
I would like to address Martin's question just for a second. There's only one person in the world who has already a no-spy agreement, and that's the German Chancellor Angela Merkel. He got it personally from the American president, and this is something never happened in American history. He got it only for the duration of Obama's second term. He said it publicly in an interview with German television. He said, as long as I'm the president of the United States, don't worry about your communication. And if there is another president, you have to negotiate it again. So this interview was, from the American side, it was probably the biggest gift the Germans could expect. The American president sitting down for almost 15 minutes with second public German television giving an interview. The interview made things worse because as a German chancellor, I mean, she was listening to it. And what she got from it was, I have a guarantee. No minister in my cabinet has a guarantee. My staff has no guarantee. My deputy has no guarantee. Nobody has a guarantee. There is no guarantee saying for political purposes, we are not going to spy in Germany. For economic purposes, we are not going to spy in Germany. We don't spy on ordinary German citizens if we don't have a suspicion to do it for a very good reason. We behave like a true friend. So, what the president has said in his speech, that there have to be some ground rules established under which purposes and under which circumstances and for what purposes do we listen into conversations from friends. That's at the core of it. And I have learned from the president's speech that the DNI and the Attorney General are those who are working on this new rule book now, and I hope it will be at least partly a public one. When we come to metadata and bulk collection, I believe there are a lot of similarities between the United States and Europe, and there could be some common ground on all this. The president has already said here that the state shouldn't be the one who's collecting and storing this data. That's exactly what we have in Europe. It's not the state collecting it, it's private companies collecting it, and under certain circumstances, I would add under too many circumstances, the state can tap into this data and use it for law enforcement purposes, for example. So we do something similar. The Americans do it, and we know that this is data we need for certain purposes. But there have to be some assurances, and I have to say, I don't feel assured that a secret service is storing all this data. I think this data shouldn't be in the hand of a state. It shouldn't be in the hand of particularly a secret service. It has to be under certain control, and then for limited purposes, with a very good reason, you tap into this data.
Well, I don't want to spoil the atmosphere, but I would like to first of all say that there is a clear distinction to be made between what happens in terms of the spies and Mrs. Merkel's smartphone and so on. And on the other hand, the development of the activities at a very important pace, very quickly in the field of the citizens, the companies that are, for instance, activities like data mining, which are developing very fast. And so what I would like to say is that whatever good regulation you would have, there is, at this very moment, an important gap between rules, regulation, and the practice. I'll give you one example. Is there anyone in the room that knows who has the data about his or her identity? Do you know who is, do you know your data in what kind of, how do you call this, in what kind of computers of private companies your data are? Although this might be regulated very well and very, very strictly, the practice, and then the enforcement of these regulations, this is really key. And that's why we think the debate we will have to have the coming months and years will have to include how you implement legislation, how you enforce it. Volume and scale are really bringing a total new dimension to the question. And we think this could include, for instance, putting at the disposal of ordinary citizens technological tools to control who has the data, who has your data, what is done with the data. Because once again, for instance, legislations, European directives now include that when private companies store your data, that you have the right to reply and you have the right to consult and so on. This is good for lawyers. This is on the paper, but in practice, this means not. This is not very effective in the practical way in the daily life. And so, let's make a clear distinction between first the activities of espionage and so on and surveillance, and this has to be addressed by even a president in granting a guarantee to a single person like Chancellor Merkel on the one hand. On the other hand, what's happening in the private sector, and second thought is that there is a very important difference and an enormous gap between having something regulated, having a good legislation, a very complicated legislation based also on technological knowledge and evidence on the one hand, and then the practice, what it means in daily life and the position of an ordinary citizen confronted with data mining activities by private companies, for instance.
That's a very important point.
Good morning, I'm Dorothy Zinberg, Kennedy School of Government and the Berkman Institute. I'd like to address the elephant in the room, which is Edward Snowden, and ask the panel what you think about what he has done. Like Professor Crawford, I've been in Berlin recently, and the difference there of looking upon him as a hero as opposed in England, for example, to seeing him as a traitor was very marked. So really would like to hear what you're thinking about that. What about Germany giving him some kind of asylum? And if I could make an observation that might be wrong, I was in Germany, in Berlin, when the wall was coming down, and had the opportunity to meet a number of East German journalists who were coming across for the first time. And what I felt we learned from them was the fear of Stasi and the lack of privacy. And I think some of the well-placed concern about privacy in Germany that is greater than it is in the United States comes from the recent experience of what the whole Stasi administration did to the psyche of the country.
I think we can't skip this. Georg, you're pretty bold.
I've met him in Moscow last October for 3 hours. I do agree with what the editorial in the New York Times said. Then they said, we believe he's a whistleblower, he did some good, and he shouldn't be on the run for the rest of his life. And I do agree. I think it would be a very good idea if he could return to his country here, and that there would be, that one could find a solution for him, however this would look like. I don't see that anybody in Germany will grant him asylum. And I don't like the term of asylum when it comes to Edward Snowden, because asylum is for those who are for political or religious reasons under threat. And this is not true for Edward Snowden. He is under threat because he broke the law, and I think one could make a very good point that he's a whistleblower. But that is at the core of the debate and has nothing to do with asylum. But don't expect that the Germans will solve this problem for you. We will leave it to the Americans.
Thank you for this German position. Karl Kaiser.
And the others?
I made it voluntarily to answer or not to answer, so it's...
Karl Kaiser, Harvard University. I have a question to Mr. Leterme, picking up a point that Georg made earlier. Isn't the notion of balkanization something that is in the interest of Silicon Valley and the industry here, which has about 80 to 90% of the world market? If trust is not reestablished, and if there is no agreement, can you blame companies reinventing what the telecom has now offered, national systems, so that data do not leave the country? It's a very expensive proposition, admittedly, but the danger is definitely there. And if there is no agreement, some proper agreement, I think it's inevitable for economic reasons to protect companies.
Well, this could be the start of a very long debate. I was wondering, while you were formulating your question, when you look at the top ICT companies in the world, there are lots of companies. I couldn't say what nationality they have. I mean, they are global players. And in terms of taxation, they have their origin in terms of activities and in terms of labor force and so on and so on. What I mean to say is that maybe we will have a kind of setback now, but the future of the internet is in the openness, is in the is in its future as an engine of economic growth, of unleashing creativity, innovation, and so on. And so you're very right that if there is no global agreement which is then enforced, it could bring companies, individual specific companies, in a position to take a kind of measures to protect some data. But in the long run, I think you can't really for a long time hold this back. This is the future of the internet. The essence, the characteristics of the internet is to spread, is to be a global forum. The whole question is, even top Champions League football, I don't know if Mr. Murphy is here anymore, but even Bayern Munich and Barcelona cannot play a good football game without a referee and without rules. And the question is, the rules we have now, are they applied once again? Are they enforced in the right way? Do we have to change a little bit the rules? That has to be the debate. And once again, making a clear distinction between what happens between, let's say, military capacities and what military forces are doing. And then on the other hand, what's happening, what the behavior is also of companies and public authorities in the field of private relations with citizens and trade and the functioning of the economy.
I just want to draw a distinction between two different kinds of companies. There's a small company that's trying to find its market, and then there's a giant telecommunications provider that's trying to increase its profits. In this story, both play a role. There are huge numbers of startups in Berlin. It's a very exciting place right now. They would like to be able to find their global markets and do not want to be limited to routing within the Schengen area. At the same time, the reason that traffic often gets routed through London and Amsterdam is because Deutsche Telekom refuses to peer in Frankfurt, meaning to swap its traffic for free. And so it's just expensive to go through their lines to reach people in Germany directly. So they have a very strong interest in raising a border so that they can increase their profits, which is not in the long-term interest of every German. Take away my mic? That's fine.
There is another question, just on the notion of this gentleman and then over there. Just on the notion of Snowden, because we didn't get an American answer on that. My feeling is, as a German, that the Snowden case is very much a symbol for what goes wrong on both sides of the Atlantic. And the more ambitious we try to sort that out, the Snowden case will go away. The problem is if it lasts for a long time and he gets a doctorate honoris causa, which one university is working on, others are saying he should get a Nobel Prize, etc. This is not helpful to sort things out. On the other side, I think Americans should look into their whistleblower system, which is not very effective in many ways. And so it's too simple just to see Snowden as from the treason side. I mean, even the president said this guy made a big service to this nation to enable this discussion. And what I always learned about America and experienced here while being here, that's a deliberate democracy, and that's what it's all about. So at least Americans have to acknowledge this part of the equation too. Please.
Yes, thank you. I'm Richard Rosen from the Telus Institute in Boston. I think it's important to also go back to the national security issue, because that clearly is part of this discussion. And the problem I have with this panel and all the talk so far is everyone's completely ignored American history and how this hysterical response to security and terrorism has arisen. The U.S. has a long period, most of the 20th century, in terms of ignoring civil liberties issues, and goes back at least to the 1920s in terms of the Red Scares, the police departments able to tap phones without court approval, the FBI tapped many phones without court approval, etc. So a lot of security things were done, apropos of the speaker from Belgium, but they weren't good. And so I don't know how you could begin to act like, our security, the way we interpret it here, is ethically at all correct or reasonable. I mean, George Bush in particular created this incredible scare among the American population around terrorism after 9/11. So it just played into American history going back to the McCarthy era and whatever. The FBI tapped Martin Luther King's telephone because the FBI claimed he was a terrorist. I mean, you can use the word terrorist for anyone and any of us in this room. Now, the commercial issues are separate, but you have to look at American history and realize how terrorism has always been an issue as a security issue. The Communist Party, the Socialist Party, whoever, unions were always suspect, right? Those are the people whose phones were tapped illegally, of course, through most of the era. And you can't ignore that, okay? And now, so all of our phones are being tapped illegally. Right? Most of the judges in the recent cases have pointed out that there's almost no evidence that any good was done in terms of preventing terrorism. So here you have a situation where basically this national security apparatus around IT and computers is like probably the biggest American jobs program for upper income people, right? And we're wasting tens of billions, if not hundreds of billions of dollars a year on this program. And then, of course, once you have the apparatus in place, people want to use it, of course. But, there was never a tradition in this country of spying through telecommunications lines on any significant number of people. It might have been a few hundred people out of, 200 million.
I would love to defend the United States here because I have to. I mean, given being half German and seeing into German history, I have to say I see certain missteps in your history, but compared to the history of my own country, I would say you're quite lucky with all the mistakes you made. Second point, a little bit more serious. From the beginning on, when many people in Germany said the Americans don't care about all that, I believe you are flat wrong. The first country in world's history who had a parliamentarian investigation into wrongdoing of American intelligence was the United States with the Church Committee, and it was groundbreaking. And a lot of congressional oversight, FISA court, all these things we have today, and congressional oversight, the whole concept of congressional oversight, which was implemented in other Western democracies, came from the United States. So I see these missteps and I'll share it, but I always believe that the United States has such a strong democratic tradition that they're able to discuss these things and to learn from the mistakes they have made. And that's why I'm still optimistic that Americans will learn that certain things the NSA did simply went too far. And they are not good for protecting this country, especially when it comes to ordinary spying. They do more harm to this country than they do good. So I want to be still an optimist when it comes to this country. And I hope I will be wrong. We'll discuss it 2015.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Herbert Quelle. I'm a German diplomat and currently on a sabbatical at the Weatherhead Center for International Affairs. My question is a little wider than the questions focused on bilateral relations and the data security issue. I would be interested in hearing the view of the panel on the importance of the Internet Governance Forum for showing us the trajectory of the internet, where it will go, where it will stand in a couple of years. And then I'd be interested in knowing your assessment of the two camps that we've heard about, those who are clearly pro-openness of the internet, and those, as I see it, that growing group of countries who want to have a say in the regulation of the internet in their. So is there optimism that you would see, or would you see the camp of the latter group interested in regulating growing? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for the question. I think there is a great deal of optimism. There was a statement from the EU just recently supporting the idea of multi-stakeholder governance, which is our way of talking about continuing to govern the internet as it has been governed, that is with input from a huge variety of stakeholders, civil society, business, but with an increasingly important role for government. The United States has said that it supports the EU's position along these lines. The Internet Governance Forum, to which you referred, is a very important opportunity for dialogue about many Internet policy-related issues and should continue healthy. But our shared interest in keeping the plumbing of the Internet, the names and numbers, out of the business of controlling speech remains as strong as it ever has been. And I am very optimistic that the EU and the United States will continue to work along those lines. The Internet, again, is just a language, just a way of speaking. It has no choke point, except in the hands of the telecommunications companies who are shipping the bits around. And it's in our shared interest to keep those bits flowing as freely as possible.
We can have one further question, then we have to break for the lunch break. Well, please go ahead.
Charles Kogan, Kennedy School, formerly CIA. A couple of years ago, I did an article for the French magazine Commentaire on the No Spy Agreement, the failure of it between the United States and France. This is the brainchild of Admiral Dennis Blair, who, when he came to office, perceived a certain anomaly between this informal no spy agreement among the Five Eyes and nothing as regards France or Germany. I mean, was New Zealand the bigger ally than these continental allies of ours? And he went to the White House and he suggested that he deepen the relationship with France, and in a second time he would do it with Germany, and the White House gave him a go ahead. However, although the negotiations advanced to a considerable extent, he made the mistake of putting the thing into writing. And the White House balked, and the idea was eliminated. So it's out there now. I know, as Mr. Mascolo said, negotiations are going on, particularly between the Germans and the United States. I think the French have some misgivings about it, although they supported the Blair idea. But I think they might regard a closer relationship as an infringement on sovereignty. But this remains to be worked out because it is an anomaly. This informal no spy agreement among the Five Eyes and nothing anywhere else. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I take this rather as a comment than a question. We anyway overrun our time. Please join me with a hand of applause for the panelists here.